Today we're going to talk about the sheer practicality and the reason why some of the diesel market is fading just a little bit. We're starting to see it year over year, just a little bit more and a little bit more, and we're going to talk about why. This video isn't directed particularly at one manufacturer or the other. This is just a conversation about the diesel market as a whole. I happen to be here at a dealership, has a tons of Ram, Cummins trucks, so that's going to be a little bit of the focus of this point, but you'll get the overarching conversation, which is for years and years and years, we all remember the days. Most of the manufacturers were really strong in their half-ton segment. That was a big push, and they were pushing really hard in their diesel segment, right? Because those were kind of the two main chunks of the market. Now, we're starting to see a lot more of those gas heavy duties come into play, 7.3 from Ford, 6.6 from GM, etc., etc. And I'm going to talk about why. So don't get me wrong, the gas heavy duty segment has always been a thing. They've always been there. But if you're like me, it's always kind of seemed a little bit more like they offered them just so they did, right? It wasn't something that any of them tried to push overly hard. There's been some really good ones over the years. 6-liter V8 from Chevy comes to mind. 8.1 even back in the day, and way back in the day we had things like the 454s, blah, 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 blah. But primarily for the last, 20, 25 years or so, say, like I say, it's been mostly the half tons and the diesels. And why is that? Well, really, I wanted to take a look at some of the old figures from the older trucks. I think the main reason is that's pretty much where the gap was. You had your half tons and then you had your diesels. Now, diesels today, a lot of these arguments are still going to be the same, but the gas heavy duty trucks were never even close to as capable as, say, their diesel counterparts, right? And not that they are today, but the difference is the way I think most people are using the heavy duty trucks now. And the reason that people bought heavy duty trucks back in the day versus what you can accomplish now with, if you bought a diesel heavy duty back in the day, odds are nowadays you can get the job done just fine with a gas heavy duty or possibly even a half ton. So that's really taken away from a lot of the diesel, guys. So again, not to say that the modern day gas trucks keep up, quote unquote, with the modern day diesel trucks, right? This 6.7 Cummins still blows a 6.4 out of the water. A 6.7 Power Stroke or even a high output still stomps out a 7.3 or their 6.8. Duramax still lights up the 6.6 V8, right? That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying, though, is those gas trucks are so close to as capable as the diesels that we all knew back in the day was kind of our entry into loving them and using them, that now, modern day, you do things with a gas truck now that you needed a diesel for back then. I think one of the big factors that's kind of taken away from some of the diesels is just price. As we know, diesels have always been more expensive, but at a time like right now when trucks are, say, historically the most expensive, tacking on another $10,000 or $12,000 to whatever truck you're looking at is kind of a big deal for a lot of folks, right? If you're already spending 50, 60, 70 grand, you might take a look if that extra expense is really, really necessary for whatever you're doing, right? Now, don't get me wrong. There is, always has been, is now, and for the foreseeable future will be a need, and those folks that truly, truly need a diesel. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm more talking about is the guy who uses his truck to commute to work back and forth, and he's got a 8 or 9,000 pound camp trailer that he tows, on the weekend, a few times a year, goes hunting, does whatever. But he's towing, let's say sub 10% of his time spent in the truck is towing, right? That guy, practicality wise, doesn't necessarily need a diesel anymore. Even if you have a 15,000 pound fifth wheel, there's gas options that are going to do a hell of a job for you. So speaking of gas options, let's talk about a couple of those, right? You can have a 7.3 from Ford, 430 horsepower, 485 torque. Those are rated to tow anywhere from like 14 to 17,000 pounds, give or take. 6.6 V8 from GM, 401 horsepower, 464 torque. 14,000 to 17,000 pounds, give or take a little bit. Those aren't exact quotes, but, combine that with you're hooking them up to 10-speed transmissions. Compare that to some of the most legendary diesels that we're all such big fans of. '06 LBZ Duramax, what a lot of people to consider, the peak of the Duramaxes. 360 horsepower, 650 torque. So obviously, you got them beat on torque. It's a diesel. Of course you do, right? But That's a 6-speed, and those were rated to tow, 10,000-ish pounds, give or take. 0659, again, what a lot of people to consider the BV pinnacle of the old Cummins trucks. 325 horsepower, 610 pound-feet of torque with a 4-speed automatic transmission, also rated to tow somewhere in that 10,000-ish neighborhood, right? So again, point being, if you were the guy that had an 8, 9, 10,000 pound camp trailer, that was probably your option. You were going to go buy a diesel because you kind of needed to. Now, what I also don't want to get into with this conversation is the cool factor, right? Don't get me wrong, I love a good diesel just as much as anybody else. I'm strictly just talking about raw capabilities for the average purchaser. And what is the average guy doing a lot? He's towing his boat, he's towing his camper, he's towing jet skis, a side-by-side, stuff like that. You don't need a diesel to do a lot of that stuff. And at some point in time, you kind of did, right? The other kind of crazy thing is that guy who has an 8, 9, 10,000 pound camp trailer, now not only can he go look at the gas heavy duty segment, but he could take a real hard look at a lot of the 1500s, the half ton segment too. There's a lot of the 1500s half tons that are rated to tow north of 10,000 pounds, right? So if you're only ever towing some jet skis, a side by side, and a 6,000 pound camp trailer, I mean, do you really need a heavy duty truck? No, you really don't. The other thing you talk about when you talk about the old diesels and why so many people loved them was just the overarching reliability, right? Those old LBZs, even LB7s, 5.9s, 7.3s, even to an extent, you'll have your arguments for the 6 liters and stuff like that once you do some work to them. They were overall, and yes, I know you can save it, whatever your favorite is, 5.9s and transmissions or 6.0s and head gasket, whatever, right? Overall, the reputation of the diesels back then as a whole was that they were rock solid reliable for the most part, right? Now, like any machine ever produced, of course they had their problems, but we're not going to pretend they were innocent by any means, but it seems like you hear a lot more horror stories with these modern day diesels, just with the DEF fluid and regens and all this kind of stuff, right? So combine the expensiveness, all the extra goodies on there, likelihood of failures, X, Y, and Z. Let's not also forget to talk about how much more expensive the maintenance is, right? Just there's so many factors. Speaking of maintenance and some of that stuff, your overall cost of ownership on a modern diesel compared to a modern heavy duty gas or even a 1500, just pure maintenance is a lot more expensive on something like a diesel. So again, it goes back to, if you're not towing something that really requires you to have one, which, like I say, there's still plenty of people that applies to, and that's a whole different category, right? But if you're not one of those guys and you don't care about the cool factor, where back in the day, a lot of those guys would still pick up the diesel because, like I say, they had a good reputation for reliability. They were pretty much the only option when it came to heavy towing. And overall, they were more expensive, but they weren't, you know, that much more expensive to maintain and that much more expensive right off the rip to purchase. At least looking back now, that wasn't the case at the time. A lot of people would have argued against that, but compared to nowadays, it's not even close. And again, I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to say that you shouldn't buy a diesel or diesels are a waste or any of that stuff, but if it came down to it, I'd still love to have a diesel even if I wasn't, really using it, just because that's how we are. We love diesel. That's our thing, right? Just talking about the raw practicality. So like I said, guys, I think it primarily just comes back to, what is the average person who might be interested in a truck or currently owns a truck or whatever, when it comes time for that next upgrade, what are they likely to do? Are they likely to spend all the extra money just because, which a lot of people do? That's okay, nothing wrong with it. But reality being, like I say, if you drive to work and you tow your jet skis once in a while and you're side by side and maybe you have a little camp trailer or whatever, there's just not the need to jump into the diesel like there used to be. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of this kind of movement towards the gas vehicles and the 1500s in general. Now, like I say, if you're the guy towing significant weight, 20,000 pounds, 25, 30, obviously there's still the need for the diesels and things like that. There's always going to be that need. But even the diesels are a good example comparing back to kind of the old school legendary trucks that we think about, right? You lost your mind if you thought you were going to tow 35,000 pounds with a 95 F350, right? I'm not saying people didn't do it, but just in terms of overall practicality and what the overall goal was for the vehicles that were produced, it's significantly changed, right? Where diesels now are in a completely different category than they ever used to be as well, on the flip side, too, right? So combine that with someone who is now a hotshot vehicle worker, right, or something like that, man, you can have one of these trucks and your capabilities are unbeknownst to what they used to be. There's certainly a place for these trucks, don't get me wrong. They're still a great segment. It just goes back to, like I say, at the same time, back then you wouldn't dream of towing a 10,000 pound camp trailer with a half-ton truck of any kind. Can you imagine trying to do that any kind of frequent basis with an old 5.4 F-150 with the round nose? Dude, yeah, right. That was never going to happen with any kind of reliability and consistency, right? So it's the same thing. We've just come so far in the vehicle market in terms of capabilities, sheer power, what everything's capable of doing, that it's squeezing a lot of those people that were at this upper diesel level kind of down. Not squeezing, just they have options. And a lot of them aren't choosing to spend all the extra money just to have the diesel, when now there's plenty of other options, where before you really didn't have an option. Another thing I haven't even touched on yet is fuel economy. There used to be some big fuel economy benefits to going with a diesel, but with a lot of the modern emissions and all the other stuff on them, that's not as much the case anymore. There's still a little bit, towing from big gas motor to diesel motor. Like I say, there's still major benefits to the diesel, but they're much, much smaller than what they used to be for the majority of the truck buyers who are doing your kind of average things. So that's going to pretty much do it, guys. I just wanted to touch on some pretty hot points as to why I think we're starting to see that diesel dominance kind of fade out a little bit. And you're starting to see companies really, really pushing and working hard on gas trucks, heavy duty gas V8s, things like that. Because the reality is, for a lot of us, I don't know if it'd be worth the extra jump for the diesel. Now, am I still going to do it on my next truck? Probably, right? I just like it, and I think a lot of you are the same way. But like I say, just raw practicality, what you need, you don't need the diesel anymore. It's just a little bit different now. But thanks for watching, everybody. Drop a like, leave a comment if you agree, disagree, talk some smack in the comments. Whatever you want to do, let me know. Thanks, guys.